Leviticus 4, the sin offering. Verse 1. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Speak to the children of Israel, saying, If a person sins unintentionally against any of the commandments of the Lord in anything which ought not to be done, and does any of them, if the anointed priest sins, bringing guilt on the people, then let him offer to the Lord for his sin, which he has sinned, a young bull without blemish, as a sin offering. He shall bring the bull to the door of the tabernacle of meeting, before the Lord, lay his hand on the bull's head, and kill the bull before the Lord. Then the anointed priest shall take some of the bull's blood, and bring it to the tabernacle of meeting. The priest shall dip his finger in the blood, and sprinkle some of the blood 7 times before the Lord, in front of the veil of the sanctuary. And the priest shall put some of the blood on the horns of the altar of sweet incense before the Lord, which is in the tabernacle of meeting, and he shall pour the remaining blood of the bull at the base of the altar of the burnt offering, which is at the door of the tabernacle of meeting. He shall take from it all the fat of the bull as the sin offering, the fat that covers the entrails, and all the fat which is on the entrails, the 2 kidneys and the fat that is on them by the flanks, and the fatty lobe attached to the liver above the kidneys, he shall remove, as it was taken from the bull of the sacrifice of the peace offering, and the priest shall burn them on the altar of the burnt offering. But the bull's hide, and all its flesh, with its head and legs, its entrails and offal, the whole bull he shall carry outside the camp to a clean place, where the ashes are poured out, and burn it on wood with fire. Where the ashes are poured out, it shall be burned. Now, if the whole congregation of Israel sins unintentionally, and the thing is hidden from the eyes of the assembly, and they have done something against any of the commandments of the Lord in anything which should not be done, and are guilty, when the sin which they have committed becomes known, then the assembly shall offer a young bull for the sin, and bring it before the tabernacle of meeting. And the elders of the congregation shall lay their hands on the head of the bull before the Lord. Then the bull shall be killed before the Lord. The anointed priest shall bring some of the bull's blood to the tabernacle of meeting. Then the priest shall dip his finger in the blood, and sprinkle it 7 times before the Lord, in front of the veil. And he shall put some of the blood on the horns of the altar which is before the Lord, which is in the tabernacle of meeting. And he shall pour the remaining blood at the base of the altar of burnt offering, which is at the door of the tabernacle of meeting. He shall take all the fat from it, and burn it on the altar. And he shall do it with the bull, as he did with the bull as a sin offering. Thus he shall do with it. So the priest shall make atonement for them, and it shall be forgiven them. Then he shall carry the bull outside the camp, and burn it as he burned the first bull. It is a sin offering for the assembly. When a ruler has sinned and done something unintentionally against any of the commandments of the Lord his God in anything which should not be done, and is guilty, or if his sin which he has committed comes to his knowledge, he shall bring as his offering a kid of the goats, a male without blemish. And he shall lay his hand on the head of the goat, and kill it at the place where they kill the burnt offering before the Lord. It is a sin offering. The priest shall take some of the blood of the sin offering with his finger, put it on the horns of the altar of the burnt offering, and pour its blood at the base of the altar of burnt offering. And he shall burn all its fat on the altar, like the fat of the sacrifice of the peace offering. So the priest shall make atonement for concerning his sin. It shall be forgiven him. If anyone of the common people sins unintentionally by doing something against any of the commandments of the Lord in anything which ought not to be done, and is guilty, or if his sin which he has committed comes to his knowledge, then he shall bring as his offering a kid of the goats, a female without blemish, for his sin which he has committed. And he shall lay his hand on the head of the sin offering, and kill the sin offering at the place of the burnt offering. Then the priest shall take some of its blood with his finger, put it on the horns of the altar of burnt offering, and pour all the remaining blood at the base of the altar. He shall remove all its fat, as fat is removed from the sacrifice of the peace offering, and the priest shall burn it on the altar for a sweet aroma to the Lord. So the priest shall make atonement for him, and it shall be forgiven him. If he brings a lamb as his sin offering, he shall bring a female without blemish. Then he shall lay his hand on the head of the sin offering, and kill it as a sin offering at the place where they kill the burnt offering. The priest shall take some of the blood of the sin offering with his finger, put it on the horns of the altar of the burnt offering, and pour all the remaining blood at the base of the altar. He shall remove all its fat, as the fat of the lamb is removed from the sacrifice of the peace offering. Then the priest shall burn it on the altar, according to the offerings made by fire to the Lord. So the priest shall make atonement for his sin that he has committed, and it shall be forgiven him. Let's read the commentary here for Leviticus 4. So verse 1, establishing an offering to atone for the sins of God's people was an absolute necessity in order for a holy God to interact with sinful humans. That God himself had to initiate this is obvious from the opening phrase. The Lord spoke to Moses, making a way for sinners to be made right with him has always been important to God. Interestingly, the natural human reaction for dealing with sin is to hide. As Adam and Eve did in the garden after they sinned. See Genesis chapter 3 verse 8. Verse 2, Israel's sin offering provided forgiveness and atonement for sins committed unintentionally against any of the Lord's commands. This is a broad statement that covers all kinds of situations. Although in chapter 5 verse 1 through 6 the Lord gave 4 specific examples of unintentional sins needing atonement, should you wonder about intentional sins committed in deliberate rebellion against God, know that the only atonement for them was the death of the offender. In verse 3, the structure of chapter 4 outlines the sin offering requires for 4 groups in Israel's camp. The nation was still in the wilderness when Moses received the law. These groups were the anointed priests, the whole community of Israel, leaders, and the common people. The word common, of course, had nothing to do with their intrinsic value to God. Rather, it was a recognition of diverse positions within the community and the potential impact their sins would have on the nation. This difference applied to the cost of the animals, or grain in the case of extreme poverty, that were required for the sacrifice and the ritual of applying the blood to achieve atonement. With this in mind, we can see why the sins of the anointed priests were the first that needed to be atoned for. The entire sacrificial system would grind to a halt if the high priest, which is probably the more precise way to refer to the anointed priest, was carrying unforgiven sin that would disqualify him from ministering before the Lord. His sin would bring guilt on the entire nation, so his sacrifice had to be a young, unblemished bull, the costliest animal for an Israelite. Verse 4, the priest would lay his hand on the bull's head, signifying that this animal was bearing his sin. He was then to slaughter it before the Lord, catching the creature's blood in a bowl. The phrase "before the Lord" occurs 10 times in chapter 4 alone, and many times afterward. This means that through these rituals, people were constantly being reminded that their sin was first and foremost an offense against the holy God they worshipped. Thus, it was him they needed to satisfy. David showed he understood this truth when he was finally forced to face his sins of adultery with Bathsheba and the murder of her husband Uriah. David cried out to God in his prayer of confession, "Against you, you alone, I have sinned and done this evil." Psalms 51 verse 4. Verse 5 through 12, the anointed priest who sinned took the blood of the sacrifice into the tabernacle, dipped his finger in the bowl, and sprinkled that blood 7 times in front of the veil that separated the holy place from the most holy place. He then applied blood to the horns of the altar of fragrant incense, pouring out the rest at the base of the altar of the burnt offering. The fat of the sacrifice was burned as a further offering to the Lord, and the rest of the carcass was taken away and burned. Many of these procedures were the same for other offerings, but it's important to note that the priest had to be first in line for cleansing and forgiveness, so he could serve effectively before the Lord in handling the people's sin offerings. In verse 13, the second set of sin offering procedures is for the whole community of Israel. This signals a logical progression because if the congregation as a whole was under God's displeasure for sin, nothing good was going to happen at the individual level. Similarly, in the church, God's people need to need to keep short their sin accounts with the Lord, so that we can move ahead as one to advance His kingdom on earth. And even though the church is not given a formal ritual for corporate confession in Scripture, it is very appropriate for a local body of believers to acknowledge where they have fallen short and to seek God's forgiveness through Jesus Christ. Verse 14 through 21. The purification from sin for the community involved bringing a young bull instead of a full-grown one. The elders of the community, as the congregation's leaders and representatives, laid their hands on the bull's head in confession of sin and acknowledgement that the bull was being offered in place of the people. The bull was slaughtered and burned in a way similar to the previous procedures, and the result was atonement and forgiveness of sins. In verse 22 to 26, a leader who sinned unintentionally was to bring an unblemished male goat as his offering. Such a person could have been either a tribal leader or an official in one of the clans of a particular tribe. When the goat was slaughtered, the priest applied some of its blood to the horns of the altar of burnt offerings. And in verse 27 through 35, if one of the common people in the Israelite community sinned unintentionally, he could bring an unblemished female goat or lamb for his sin offering. These options were less costly for the average person to purchase. The ritual for atonement, however, was the same as for the leader. No one who sinned in ignorance and offended Israel's holy God was left without a remedy, but addressing the offense always required the shedding of blood. And that concludes Leviticus chapter 4. Stay tuned for Leviticus 5.